AI in San Francisco. My name is Maria and I'm standing here with Pejvan from EasyMile.
Hello.
Hello. Can you briefly introduce yourself and the professional background?
Sure. So my name is Pejvan Beigui. I'm the CTO of EasyMile, and at EasyMile we develop autonomous shuttles for the last mile. And we also work with other car manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers to produce level 4 autonomous versions of their vehicles. So my professional background is that I've been working with EasyMile since inception, basically, back in 2014. And before that, I worked for more than 10 years in the financial industry, working, it's a previous life, completely different technologies, but working in trading systems for commodities.
So what fascinates you about autonomous driving that you, switched sides, so to say?
That's a very good question. And so after spending a lot of time working for large banks as a technologist, I wanted to invest in something that would be more impactful for society as a whole. And the autonomous vehicles, I'm not sure I can call it an industry yet, but at least the domain is quite interesting, both in the technical aspects for a technologist like me, because robotics, deep learning, and all the high-scale things that you need to do to make that happen, but also as a societal problem, because the impact of autonomous mobility will be very, very large scale. It's going to reshape the way that we think about mobility, about cities. It's going to be highly disruptive for car manufacturers and all that massive industry. So it's a very high impact project, and I was very keen on working on that.
Okay, like you said, we were facing a lot of challenges and disruptions, also in the way we think about mobility. So what could we expect? How can we think about mobility in, like, let's say 5 years, 10 years, and then let's take 20 years?
So very long-term predictions are very hard.
But
let's say that in 5 to 10 years we expect to have fully autonomous vehicles, and by fully autonomous I mean that you don't need any steering wheel, you don't need any pedals, you don't need a driver's seat. That's what we're working on at EasyMile. And you can think of basically the car ownership is going to be kind of disrupted. And if you can summon a car at will, to bring you from place A to point B, then you don't need to own that car at all. It's like having a taxi, but a very cheap one, because currently the cost of a taxi is obviously the driver. And if you think as a car as a financial asset, it's a very expensive financial asset, and that's depreciating really rapidly. You pay a very high price, but the moment you're out of the shop, it's already like 20% off.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's spending like 90 to 95% of its time just parked and not being used. So that's also has a very high impact on our planet as well, because if you think about all the efforts that is put into producing all these non-productive assets, then the day that cars are fully autonomous, they can be used like 90–95% of the time. You don't need parking lots anymore. You can reclaim those spaces to do much more productive things. And same for the roads. So typically in Europe, 2 of the lanes are occupied by parking spaces. So you can imagine that these lanes are going to be freed for driving. So that's going to have a major impact on how we think about mobility, because the day that you don't need to drive, you can work in your car, you can live further out from your workplace, and everything can be delivered to you as well. So the distances are going to be shortened in that aspect. And finally, and that might be a smaller part of the population, but a lot of people cannot drive because they're either disabled or too old or too young, and they're going to be also mobile. So that's also something that is going to be very important.
So we have a new wave of mobile population, but also like population or a society that, although it is mobile, is not owning the mobility, but share it and is more connected with it, right?
That's right. And so what you can think of is that that's something that I reflect often. I don't have an answer to that, but the fact is that technology has connected people a lot more than like 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. But still, people need to have these physical kind of meetings and relationships, and that's why people come to conferences like this, is because they want to meet each other, and they would probably not, do it online. So people will be able to, move much more freely and do a lot more things that they currently can.
Then there are countries like the Scandinavian or Denmark, where they are trying to get people to use the bike instead of a car. I mean, even if it's just a normal car. Is this also something that autonomous driving is going against it, or is just like helping with?
That's an interesting question. I think that all these mobilities are going to be complementary. So one of the things that we're trying to do with our autonomous shuttle, for example, is to have this multimodal type of mobility extended. So typically, you're not going to take our shuttle for very long distances, but at the same time, from going to point A to point B and take a metro or a train, for example, it will help you avoid having to take your car and park your car somewhere and all that. And I think that the electric scooters, the bikes and all that are also towards that. So I don't think that you will be competing with those new mobilities, because they're much cheaper, much more efficient. And if you can go from point A to point B because with an electric scooter or a bike, because you're healthy, because the distance are not too long, then you will probably continue doing that.
So it's more like, connect all these challenges so that the person that is traveling has the best options, more or less.
Exactly. So you will have all the different options, and even for public transport, you will be able to connect all these. So currently, if you want to take like an electric scooter, you have to pay for that, and then you have to pay for the bus, and then you might have to pay for the train. But I think at some point you will be able to have like a one ticket that will get you all that.
That would be awesome. Let's try to dig a bit into your case study that you're presenting, and it will discuss how autonomous vehicles cope with pedestrians and urban traffic in general. Can you share some insights with us?
So our shuttles are designed for city centers and corporate campuses, and these are like very difficult areas for autonomous vehicles. So if you think about the two biggest use cases, one is the highway or the motorway, where your domain is quite limited. You have long lanes and no pedestrians, bikes, animals, kids and all that. So that makes it easier, but at the same time the speed is higher, so the complexity is more into managing the speed. But in urban areas, you have a lot of different obstacles, moving obstacles, like the roadside users and drivers. What makes it difficult with pedestrians is that their behavior is at the same time quite unpredictable, and they're vulnerable. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
So at the same time, they're vulnerable. So if you don't take particular care about how to handle those situations, accidents might happen, and that's going to be dangerous. So in dense urban areas where you have a lot of crowd, that's a lot more difficult. And then you also have like, let's say, Nordic countries in Europe, where people are well behaved and they're going to stop at a traffic sign and all that. While in more like the southern part of Europe,
I know.
You know how it is.
Yeah, traffic in Italy.
In Italy, France, Paris, so for example, is just completely different. And so the challenges are really high, especially when visibility is limited, weather conditions are not great, and all these situations.
And of course, we have heard a lot about safety in the last 2 years. We had the accidents with the Teslas, some people died with autonomous cars. What are the learnings that we had, and that also goes into in your daily work, that you apply in your daily work?
So one thing that is important to realize is that a lot of companies are conducting a lot of testing, and that there's been 2 fatalities, which is obviously really bad. But at the same time, if you bring that to the amount of testing that has been done, they're just getting the spotlights because it's new technology. And I'm sure that every day we have a few casualties of drunk driving and texting while driving. These don't make the headlines, but people, culturally, we're not ready to accept that a kind of robot can kill a person. So I think culturally this is a problem, and I hope that we're not going to get a lot of casualties this way, but I think that there is too much spotlight put on those accidents.
So how can manufacturers and, in general companies like yourselves, put the spotlight in the right direction so that people really adopt the technology, which is of course great, but just to assure them and to gain that trust?
So we have a safety-first approach. So, for example, before deploying our vehicles, we will do a site assessment. We provide a risk assessment report, which is quite exhaustive, and we'll put everything that we can into making our deployment safe. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. So I think taking this level of responsibility is quite important in order to avoid further accidents. I can't really comment for all the other actors in the industry, but that's what we are striving for.
Would it help that if people could actually have like a test drive in an autonomous vehicle? Because right now you, as a normal person, you can't really test it, so you can't experience this and learn to trust. So is that also coming, a development that is coming in the next years, or?
So that's a good question. Again, if we take the example of our autonomous shuttle, today our customers, they're the public transport operators. So the largest transport operators in the world, typically like in Germany, it's Deutsche Bahn. In France is RATP, we have Transdev and First Group and other large transport operators. And what they're actually doing is that they're doing a lot of demonstrations, deployment for testing and all that. And for them, it's probably a good reason to understand how to use this new mobility, because again, it's not competing with buses and trains and all that, so it's complementary, and they try to understand that. And at the same time, it's good for them to also understand how their customers will use these services, and for the customers to get an understanding of what is this technology. And one of the challenges of these autonomous vehicles is that everywhere where we develop them and deploy them, you have people just jumping in front of them just to make sure that they're going to stop, right? And
really?
So, yes.
Okay.
Obviously, this is dangerous, and there is laws of physics. The vehicles are heavy, and you have to protect the people inside the vehicle at the same time as outside. If you brake really hard, those people can have accident on board. These are the kind of things that when people get used to, then they're going to stop doing, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago we said, okay, shared mobility, okay, what is this? And now everybody's using it, even Uber, and a lot of people said, okay, Uber, skip that. Nobody's using it, and it's highly convenient. Perhaps this is also something, the convenience that you have, that you don't have to own a car. To get from A to B.
If you could really have this point A to point B for, again, very cheap price, then you would probably use it a lot more than what you're currently doing with the taxis and the drivers. Again, that's the cost structure of it, right?
So then let's just see what the next years bring, more or less.
Thank you very much. It's very exciting.
Yes, thank you so much for this interview, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.